I am very excited to have the esteemed Rick Doblin here with us today. Rick, thank you for coming.
Oh, my pleasure.
So Rick, we have 20 minutes here to cover a lot of psychedelics. I say that we try to make this fun.
Oh, okay.
And maybe a little bit different than some other conversations you've done. So maybe let's start with some of the basics. What is MDMA?
MDMA is a drug invented by Merck in 1912. It stands for methylene dioxymethamphetamine. So it's in the public domain. In 1953, the Army Chemical Warfare Service did a series of animal toxicity studies looking for mind control drugs. On the one hand was mescaline, on the other hand was methamphetamine, and MDMA is in the middle. So MDMA is a phenethylamine, and it has the alerting properties of methamphetamine, but it doesn't make you jittery or clean the room 5 times. You can sit still. It has the psychedelic properties of mescaline, but it doesn't do the ego dissolving, but it has certainly the warmth of mescaline. So it's the most gentle of all the psychedelics.
A gentle psychedelic. And so when you try to describe to people how it feels, for folks that have never tried MDMA, how would you say it feels?
Well, if you take a deep breath, that's how it feels. You sort of settle into yourself. One of the ways that people can sort of come after it is to think about oxytocin. MDMA releases oxytocin, which is the hormone of nursing mothers, of love and connection. It feels like your mind quiets. You're not so much thinking about what's next or what's before. You sink into the moment. It reduces the fear in your amygdala, the fear processing part of the brain, so that you have this sense of ability to look at difficult issues, and you feel connected. I mean, people have talked about it as the love drug, the hug drug. You do feel through this oxytocin. Even when you give it to octopuses, it makes them hang out with other octopuses.
Really?
Yeah. This was
And who funded that research? Who decided to give octopi MDMA?
Well, this was Doblin, who's a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins.
Yeah.
And we provided the MDMA. I'm happy to say that we provided the MDMA. And octopuses, if you've seen my octopus teacher, they're solitary creatures. But you give them MDMA, they diverge from humans evolutionary over 600 million years ago, but they still process serotonin.
Interesting.
And so MDMA feels like the Sabbath. So a rabbi, Zalman Schachter, took MDMA, he told this to the Washington Post, that MDMA feels like the Sabbath. It's like a time out of time.
A time out of time.
Yeah.
I really like that phrase. And so you've been pioneering MDMA research for the past 35 years, is that right?
Well, 36 years, MAPS, and I had a nonprofit a couple years before that to try to fight the DEA when they tried to criminalize MDMA.
Wow, so you've been doing all of this through MAPS for 36 years now.
Yes.
What got you into it initially?
Well, I'm 68. When I was 18 years old, I was a Vietnam War draft resistor, planning to go to jail. I'd studied Martin Luther King and Gandhi and all this, and so I was going to drain the war-making system of the most energy. So I was very politically involved, and when I started doing LSD and mescaline when I was 18, and I had this sense of how I'm connected to everything, and everything's connected to me. And this was at the same time that we were going to the moon.
Yeah.
Right after this aliens talk. So we were looking at things in a more spiritual, global way, and I figured that this experience that helps us feel connected beyond our ways that we normally think of ourselves, our tribe, our religion, our nationality, our race, our gender, all these political orientations, that if people could feel our interconnectedness, that would be an antidote to genocide, an antidote to racism. So really, it was psychedelics and the political implications of this kind of spiritual mystical experience that first got me into it.
Yeah.
Then when I tried MDMA for the first time in 1982 with my girlfriend, and I just thought, my God, this is so profound. We're able to talk to each other about things that would have been difficult.
Yeah.
It was just, I thought this has to be a legal medicine.
And many would say, myself included, that you have really helped spearhead psychedelic research for 30 years. MAPS has done an unbelievable job, and we have you guys to thank for where we are today on the precipice of what will hopefully be the first FDA approval for a psychedelic therapy here in the US. Is that right?
Yeah, and actually we had a meeting with the FDA today, our team.
Today?
To talk, just a few hours ago, to talk about all of the information that they were going to see for our approval package.
Yeah.
And it went really, really well. And you generally need 2 FDA-approved phase 3 studies. We had one that was tremendously successful, published in May in 2021 in Nature Medicine. The journal Science at the end of the year said it was one of the top 10 scientific breakthroughs of the world for that year. And our second phase 3 study is going to get the final data the first week in November.
Wow.
So we are
soon.
very much in the path of submitting a new drug application to FDA.
And this new drug application will specifically be for MDMA-assisted therapy to treat PTSD in particular. Is that right?
Yes. So first off, what you said is it's therapy. We think that it's not the drug. That it's not going to be, here, take this drug, take it home, do it yourself. It'll make it better. It's only administered under the direct supervision of therapists that have been trained.
Yeah.
And it's PTSD is the only thing that we are in phase 3. We have done other studies for social anxiety in autistic adults, for anxiety from people with life-threatening illnesses,
Yeah.
for eating disorders. We're about to start a study. There's a great study by Dr. Ben Sessa did in England with alcohol use disorder.
Wow.
It helped people process trauma. They were running away from trauma into alcohol. So, but we would have to do other large-scale studies to get it approved for other indications. So the approval will be MDMA-assisted therapy by trained therapists for PTSD.
And do you plan to pursue those other indications? Are you actively pursuing them now?
Yeah, we're pursuing them in minor ways, meaning in phase 2 exploratory studies.
Yeah.
I should also add that our phase 3 studies are being done in Israel, Canada, and the United States.
All through MAPS?
All through MAPS.
Wow.
And also the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. So we want to innovate not just in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, but a new way to market a pharmaceutical where
Yeah.
you're not profit maximizing, you are public benefit maximizing, but you still are making profits.
Yeah.
So we have more of a humanitarian perspective on this.
And you guys would be the first public benefit corporation pharmaceutical company. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that we could say that it would probably be better if all the pharmaceutical companies
Absolutely.
were public benefit. In America, we have the most per capita expenses on healthcare than any country in the world, but our outcomes are down like 50 because there's so many people raking off money in different ways. So I think a public benefit when it comes to public health, and most countries of the world have national health insurance, are advanced, but I like the public benefit model, and it's also more unique in that it's now 100% owned by the nonprofit.
Yeah, that is phenomenal, a phenomenal model that I hope we see more of. I know that in your clinical trials to treat PTSD, you're not really treating moderate PTSD, you're treating severe PTSD. Is that correct? And maybe can you give us a story or something to illustrate maybe someone that has had a profound experience through MDMA-assisted therapy?
Yeah. So because of the stigma of psychedelics, we felt that we needed to work with the hardest cases.
Yeah.
So the first phase 3 study was severe PTSD. And unlike many studies of PTSD, where they exclude people that have previously attempted suicide, we felt that we needed to include those people and that they actually needed the most help.
Yeah.
So we have severe PTSD, chronic. People had PTSD an average of over 14 years in
Wow.
our first study. We even had a Vietnam vet who had PTSD for almost half a century.
Wow.
That was still able to get better. But I'll give one story which I think is indicative of how it can be helpful.
Yeah.
There was one vet who came back from Iraq, and he suffered from rage. He had a lot of problems with rage. He never hit his wife, but he threw things at her. He was always suspicious. He was very tormented. Couldn't work. He just had a terrible situation. And under the influence of MDMA, he had this image of this gorilla inside him locked in a cage. And this was his warrior self.
Wow.
And he said that when he came back from Iraq, he didn't really trust his warrior self because he saw what it had done. And so he kept it in this cage. And this warrior self of him, this gorilla, had these evil red eyes, and it had a knife in its hand that was getting out of the cage to stab him in the side. And he realized, this is sort of metaphorical, poetic, he's telling stories to himself, rewriting it, but he realized that it wasn't helpful for him to keep this part of himself in this cage.
Yeah.
So he pulled the knife out And he looked at this gorilla, he opened the cage, and these evil blood red eyes changed, and he embraced this gorilla.
Yeah.
And this was his first MDMA session, and he never had problems with rage after that.
One MDMA session.
Now, one of several, I mean, but he still had PTSD. We still need to work with him for a few more sessions. But his first session resolved this issue of rage. And it was, again, this part of himself that he didn't trust, that he knew he had to make some kind of accommodation with. And so around an 8-hour session, the MDMA sessions are 8-hour sessions, 2 therapists, and around half the time people's eyes are closed, they're listening to music, and they're having these experiences that are often in imagery and visual, and then they're rewriting their story, and they can make incredible progress doing so. And then the importance is the integration after the MDMA to ground it, to make it permanent.
That is phenomenal. That is a wonderful story, and I think stories can be so powerful. I also know that the data from these clinical trials is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk about some actual figures just so everyone understands how profound this therapy can be.
Okay. So, the FDA responds to data. They don't want to hear anything about stories. People want to hear stories. But the data is that, again, now we work with the most difficult cases. And in a controlled study, what we have is one group that gets therapy without MDMA, and the other gets therapy with MDMA.
Yeah.
So it's 42 hours of therapy. It's a male-female co-therapy team. So the control group, the people that got therapy without MDMA, average, 14 years of PTSD. 2 months after the third MDMA session, 32% no longer had PTSD.
32%.
So that's really, really good for therapy for this group that has been through all sorts of other therapy. But when you add MDMA, it more than doubles to 2/3. 67% no longer had a diagnosis of PTSD.
And these are the most severe cases.
The most severe cases. Now, another 21% had what's called clinically significant reductions of PTSD.
Yeah.
So we had 88% that were responders and 12% that were non-responders. So it doesn't work for everybody, but the response rate is incredible. Now, even more is people staying in the study. So the Veterans Administration just did a study of the 2 main therapies that they do for PTSD. One is called prolonged exposure. The other is cognitive processing therapy.
Yeah.
They had 900 vets in the study. It took them 5 years to do the study, but over half the vets dropped out of the therapy because it was too painful to confront their traumas.
Wow.
They were unable to do that. So half the people dropped out of the VA study. We had 6.5% drop out of our study.
I see.
So people, not only are they helped, but they are helped to stay in the therapy because of the MDMA.
That is so powerful. And
there's one other thing I'll just ask.
Yeah.
In our phase 2, we do a 1-year follow-up.
Yeah.
Because FDA will look at the 2-month follow-up, that's for approval. But the 1-year follow-up is more for insurance. If it's durable, will they cover it? And so what we showed is people keep getting better from the 2-month to the 1-month follow-up without us doing anything. We are done at the 2-month.
Yeah.
So we have helped people learn how to heal themselves, and they put these techniques into practice without the drug.
Yeah.
So that's the really exciting thing of our statistics, is that we don't have these statistics yet for the phase 3 studies, but...
And that is so powerful. I mean, not having a pill that these people have to take every day, but instead being able to go through this process one time, certainly with ongoing therapy, maybe some additional sessions down the line.
Yeah.
I mean, that is profound. And I'm so curious, when you have such compelling data, I know that you are targeting for an approval from the FDA towards the end of next year.
Yes.
Is there anything that would prevent that from happening? At this point, do you still see any existential risks for your research and for MDMA-assisted therapy to treat PTSD getting approved by the FDA?
Well, first off, let's take the political risks off the table.
Yes.
Because we're working with veterans, because we're working with women who have been sexually abused, we have bipartisan support. So there's no political thing. It's not like the 60s where people are using psychedelics and they were challenging the Vietnam War, and there's a backlash against that. The thing that I am concerned about the most that has not happened, doesn't look like it's going to happen, is if somebody in the MDMA group brings the trauma to the surface, is not properly supported, and either attempts or succeeds in suicide. But in our first phase 3 study, we had 2 people in the control group One woman tried to kill herself twice, and another woman was so severe in this suicidal ideation that she checked herself into a hospital to not kill herself.
Wow.
So we have demonstrated that the background of severe PTSD in therapy can be re-traumatizing and difficult for people, but we've not had that in the MDMA group. So there's no concerns also about neurotoxicity, about brain damage, about the acute side effects.
So all of the stigma around the negative side effects of MDMA, can you maybe address that, the idea that it somehow causes negative long-term effects to your brain?
Well,
where does that come from?
Yeah, so we've said that people respond to stories.
Yeah.
So Oprah, more than about 21 years ago actually, she had a story where it was a woman who had done a lot of psychedelics, including a lot of ecstasy, and her mother worked at a drug abuse treatment center,
Yeah.
and they gave her a brain scan. And so they would reveal this brain scan, and it showed all these holes in the brain. So it was a graphically manipulated brain scan that was totally false.
Wow.
I think Oprah's staff, we told them that, they used it anyway. But people still come up to me today and said, doesn't MDMA cause holes in your brain?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, there's other rumors that MDMA drains spinal fluid.
No basis.
No basis of that, no. And in therapy, we only give it a few times.
Yeah.
So we think it's going to have a favorable risk-benefit ratio. The only existential thing that I could even imagine is that if somehow or other, there's a whole series of people that do kill themselves in the MDMA group. But we're 85% of the way done. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think for people that are really curious about the psychedelic renaissance, thinking about it, chances are we will be able to get FDA approval at the end of 2023. And the meeting that we had with FDA today to go over what exact data they might want to see, to prepare them for that, looked great. Plus, we also had FDA and Health Canada inspections that were very rigorous just over the last month or so of our data and stuff, and that went well.
Yeah.
So I think
it's super exciting. And I think you said something, stories are powerful. The story that there are these negative long-term effects of MDMA, powerful story, stuck.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can replace that maybe in the last few minutes here with a new story.
Yeah.
Let's maybe paint a vision for the future. So let's assume that MDMA-assisted therapy to treat PTSD gets approved. Let's assume that the psychedelic renaissance happens. Everything happens.
Yeah.
Let's paint a picture 10 years, maybe 15 years down the line. What do you think society looks like? How has it changed through the adoption and proliferation of psychedelics?
Right. Well, a few years, 1 or 2 years after us is going to be the approval of psilocybin.
Yeah.
We already have ketamine for, and there's well over 500 or 600 ketamine clinics throughout America. So I believe that we will end up with, over the next decade or so, about 6,000 psychedelic treatment centers just in America alone. The reason I come up with that number is there's over 6,000 hospice centers where people would go to have a different approach towards death, where they're palliative care, not curative. So anytime that's big enough to have a hospice center, big enough to have a psychedelic center. So I think we will have 6,000 psychedelic treatment centers. They will not be an MDMA center, a ketamine center, psilocybin. These will be trained therapists, cross-trained in all those things. We hope to have 1 million MDMA sessions by the end of this decade.
Yeah.
I think we will start reducing the burden of trauma on society. And we will also be opening the door to psychedelic medicine. So Ibogaine, for example, is excellent for opiate addiction.
Yeah.
And we've had over 100,000 people die from overdoses last year. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a lot better treatments for substance abuse, for anxiety of all different kinds relating to terminal illness or depression. So I think society will be moving in a more mass mental health is our goal.
Yeah.
And I think by 2035, the other key part of our strategy is drug policy reform.
Yeah.
The drug war is counterproductive. It's a violation of human rights. It's used in a racist way. It fills our prisons. So I think that we'll have enough stories over the next decade from these 6,000 psychedelic treatment centers that people will hear about the benefits. And the same way has happened with medical marijuana and marijuana legalization, we will then have legalization of psychedelics and all drugs, I think. So by 2035 is our prediction we'll move to a post-prohibition world.
Yeah.
We'll have peer support. We'll train people with honest drug education, not help each other. And I think it will actually be good for the business model. And then I think by 2070, to be really in a long-term perspective, I think we will either have a spiritualized humanity or we will have destroyed ourselves.
Wow.
And I've recently spoken to some of the people that worked with Bhutan on a national happiness measure. And so what we'd like to do is a national measure of trauma and around the world. And what is the burden of trauma? And then can we, with these new techniques of healing and these techniques that will hopefully make people more comfortable with people who are different than themselves, reduce the global burden of trauma and spiritualize humanity so we can work together and thrive.
I love that, Rick. I want to say thank you again for everything you've done. Thank you for spearheading this movement. We at SALT support you. We are excited to continue supporting you, and hopefully together, not just us, but all of us, we can seek to end intergenerational trauma.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Rick.
Yes. Great.
Thank you, everyone.